Dinag Onan Hagol. Welcome one and all to this Cornish music workshop. Today we're going to look at two previously unconsidered Cornish music manuscripts and one other surprise item that's still the subject of research. All are in Crescent Kerno and they're available there for you to study firsthand. The manuscripts date from the mid-18th and early 19th century, but the surprise item is dated 1585, which is a significantly early date. In Crescent Kerno, there's a handsome leather-bound manuscript book of harpsichord music, catalogue number DG190. And in the 18th and 19th centuries it was passed down from aunt to niece in the Davies, Giddy and Gilbert families for 3 generations. The cover bears 3 names of the ladies who owned the book. The first is Philippa Davies, who lived from 1730 to 1755. She owned the book from the age of 17 until her death. It was then probably kept by her sister Catherine, wife of the fiddle-playing Reverend Edward Giddy. Then Mary Philippa Davies Gilbert had the book in 1777 at the age of 8. Catherine, or Kitty Gilbert, had the book in 1827 when she was 14 years old. The lifespan of the owners of this book, roughly a century and a half, saw huge changes. Music moved from the Baroque via the classical to the Romantic. Dances moved from the minuet via the country dance to the quadrille and the polka. And women took the first steps on the long road to social, professional and political emancipation. This book is the earliest of 4 so far found that was compiled by or for a woman in Cornwall. And today we're going to tell you what's known about the book, play some of its music and briefly address the place of women in music making in Cornwall in this important period.
When Philippa Davies signed her name with a great flourish in the front of her music book, the year was 1747 and she was 17 years old. She'd spent the early part of her life at Ednoville, the Davies farm, but when she was about 8, her mother inherited her own original family home, Tredray Manor Farm, just across the fields from St Earth, just above the Tin Stream that becomes the Hale River. So it was in Tredray House that Philippa, her sisters and her brother grew up. We don't know whether the spinet on which Philippa learnt to play was already in the house, perhaps her mother's or her grandmother's, but we do know that that was the instrument on which she and Catherine learnt to play, learnt those musical skills that were an essential part of the education of a young woman. And Philippa's mother was very confident that the girls should be educated. Of course, they would never be expected to demonstrate their skills in public. Music was for family and friends, but was part of their assets. And we know that Philippa played songs and dances. When she was quite young, her father died, and the widowed mother had very little money. In fact, when Edward Giddy came courting her sister Catherine, he complained about the cold, dark house with its one small fire. Philippa herself died at the early age of 26, but her sister Catherine kept the music book and continued to play the music which they'd played together as children. Edward Giddy himself played the violin, and when they got married, it was Catherine who inherited Treday House and so brought it into the Giddy family. So Treday House continued to echo to the sounds of the music. Catherine raised her own daughter, Mary Philippa Davies, probably named for her lost sisters. And it was her son, Davies Gilbert, who continued the music tradition, reportedly singing Trelawney with great Cornish vigour in this very same house. He in turn passed the book on to his daughter Kitty, having had it bound up with the initials of these 3 generations on the front. And so we have the unusual situation of a house passing down through a female line, bringing with it the music of grandmother, mother, aunt and daughters. And we can still hear this music today. What was it like?
Philippa's book contains a typical social repertoire: dance tunes, solo pieces and accompaniments to popular songs. There are 7 songs with lyrics in which the harpsichord provides accompaniment, and there are 10 more pieces that we know as songs that have no lyrics in the book, so they may have been played either as airs or as accompaniments. The dance tunes include 10 minuets and a gavotte, and amongst them is this tune, Praed's Minuet. Humphrey Mackworth Praed of Trevetho near Lelant was a well-regarded neighbour of Philippa's, and this tune is also found in the book of John Giddy of Key, dated about 1740, where it is called a new minuet, and this is John Giddy's new minuet, and here is what it sounds like. Towards the end of Philippa's book are the pieces Jack Latin, The Flower of Edinburgh, and an untitled piece that 100 years later became known as Kate Dalrymple. They are the advanced guard of the arrival of the country dance in Cornwall. So to summarise, we've got songs, some of which may have been played as solo airs, we've got minuets, which were the popular dance of the time, and we've got some early country dance tunes. It's useful to compare Philippa's repertoire with that of her contemporaries. In Oxfordshire, Anne Cooper, who later was Jane Austen's music teacher, compiled 2 music books about the same time as Philippa. Anne's repertoire drew on similar genres to Philippa's and, like Philippa, included works by Handel and other composers and songwriters popular in mid-century England. However, the composers Geminiani and Corelli are only found in Philippa's book. Their stars had set in Middle England, but they were still popular in Cornwall. Also, their repertoires show different emphases. In Oxfordshire, Anne's friends put more emphasis on singing than dancing, whereas in Philippa's world in Cornwall it was the other way round. And Philippa's repertoire has much in common with that of John Giddy. He also has more dances than songs. He also has works by earlier composers like Geminiani and unattributed pieces. So here is one of Philippa's daring new country dance tunes, The Flower of Edinburgh.
Mary and Kitty played their music. It was in a purely domestic setting. They learned their skills as part of their personal social attributes, part of their pursuit of the only career available to them at the time, that of marriage. But what is interesting is that this music was their choice, and it shows an interesting cultural mix. There were songs, popular songs. There were instrumental pieces, popular instrumental pieces, but they were both recent and old. For instance, the jig from Ciro was still being played by Handel 20 years after he'd written it at house parties in London. What is interesting are the untitled pieces in Philippa's book. Some of them we know the identity of. They were from the popular shows in London and Bath, but others are completely untitled and unrecognised. Did Philippa learn these things from family and friends and therefore not bother to label them because they were common knowledge? Or were some of them written by friends, relatives, local people, even the women themselves? The mix of pieces in this book suggests that the Cornish society at that time was not insular and inward looking. They were very comfortable with a folk song followed by an aria from an opera. They were perfectly at home with the idea of a minuet being followed by one of the racier country dances. And Philippa herself, she'd been reading notorious writers like Eliza Haywood. She knew there were changes in society, changes for women, and changes for women in music. In the lifetime of this music book, we go from domestic music to participation and even promotion of music in the public domain, public performance for women. But at the same time, that flow of intimate, personal music from mother to daughter, from aunt to niece, that continued to be part of Cornish society. And that brings us to our second manuscript.
In Crescent-Kerno there's a manuscript book of handwritten harp music that in the 19th century was the property of Denise Nankivell of Truro. The book contains dance tunes, solos, ensemble music and accompaniments to popular songs. The late 18th and early 19th century has been called the golden age of the harp. For young ladies, musical skill was an essential social attribute, and many played the harp, or piano, or both, and often to a high standard. We can name over 30 female harpists in Cornwall at this time, and a further 6 male harpists. Also, there were many visiting harpists and temporary residents that played at an international standard.
The vicar of St James's, Piccadilly, had to get up very early on the morning of the 26th of August, 1818, because he was to solemnise the marriage between Denise, daughter of Dr John Griffiths of the royal household, to one Thomas Nankivell, wine merchant of Truro, Cornwall. And the wedding was to take place promptly at 9 o'clock, which it did, because by 11 o'clock the newlyweds were in a post-chaise rattling along the road to Reading on the first day of a journey that took 7 days to get to Truro at their new home. Denise had with her the music that she'd spent 2 weeks before her wedding copying out, her harp music. Her harp had been sent on earlier to Lemon Street. The harp was a purely logical choice, for several reasons. Firstly, the loose connection to the royal household. At that time, the Queen, the Princess Royal, and the future daughter-in-law all played harp very proficiently. Secondly, Denise's own Welsh heritage. Her father had sold off the Welsh estates just before he took up his royal appointment, but Denise would have known of the area of Wales and its richness in music and in harp makers. Thirdly, there was in London at that time something we might call a Celtic revival. There was a great interest in all things Scottish, Irish and Welsh, in the music, in the literature and in the poetry. And lastly, probably, the fact that the French Revolution had driven a large number of exiles to London, bringing their skills, including their musical skills and those of their ability to make harps. In fact, the Erard family were just at the point where they had perfected the patented double action for the harp. This was a kind of harp that became very popular. It was able to play a much wider range of chromatic music, and that in turn inspired composers and performers to move to London. Denise would have heard many such in her time in London, and in fact Erard had a harp works at the end of Argyle Street where she lived. So when the new Mrs. Nankivell arrived in Truro, she set about finding the musical activity in Truro at that time. She met and exchanged music with other musicians. She put on house concerts and attended them. She played with other musicians. She even played for dancing, including the scandalous new waltz. There are many of those in her book. The Nankivells brought up a family in Truro and remained there for the whole of their lives. Denise played her harp in the house in Quay Street on the banks of the River Allen for another 50 years before it fell silent. And her book, her collection of handwritten music, is a unique insight into Georgian harp music in Cornwall at the time. And it also gives us a taste of what kind of music was popular with the newly emerging middle class of Truro.
Denise's book has 47 pieces reflecting the fashions of the times. There are a number of waltzes, newly fashionable and simultaneously scandalous. But the quadrilles that we know that she played aren't in this book, suggesting there's another music book somewhere. So if you find it, please let me know. There are many solo pieces, most of which have a theme and variations structure. And there's an element of multiculturalism with a French march, an Irish air, a Portuguese hymn and a Spanish saraband. There are also accompaniments to popular songs, arias and instrumental pieces. Here's one of them. As with the repertoires of John Giddy and Philippa Davies 60 or 70 years earlier, instrumental music is emphasised and the ratio of dances to songs is higher than elsewhere. But undoubtedly the most significant feature of this book is the number of Welsh tunes. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, there was great enthusiasm for things Celtic. Many Celtic, and indeed specifically Welsh, cultural societies were formed, and Iolo Morgannwg revived the Welsh gorsedd. As we've heard, Denise's grandfather was from Pembrokeshire, and her family would have known the local harpists there, such as John Richards and William Williams. And in London they'd have known John Parry and, of course, Edward Jones. Edward Jones came to London in 1775, and within 8 years he was appointed harper to the Prince of Wales. He played both the pedal harp and the Welsh harp, and he was tireless in his promotion of Welsh culture. He published 3 books of Welsh tunes. Denise's sets of themes and variations are nearly all by or in the style of Edward Jones, with only 2 exceptions. His style appears to be her favourite. He lived near her London home, and it's quite possible he was her teacher. At least 5 other musicians in Cornwall had Welsh music in their repertoire about this time. In Camborne, Tryphena Pendarves had a description of some of Edward Jones' material. Cynghannsail Cymru is a late entry in Philippa Davies' book, possibly put there by Mary Philippa Giddy or Catherine Gilbert. Francis Prideaux Brune of Padstow and John Old of Parr both had Welsh tunes in their repertoire, as did an unnamed harpist near Bude. Poignantly, her music has outlived her name. So what sort of harp did Denise play? Her music has lots of sharps and flats, so her harp was certainly chromatic. There are clues in the music that she played.
This is a Welsh triple harp. The triple harp is said to have originated in Italy in the 1600s. There are 3 ranks of strings. The 2 outer rows are tuned identically. And the centre row, which has to be reached through for, gives the chromatic notes. It's difficult to play, expensive to string, and went out of fashion very quickly in Europe. But it remained popular in Wales, who took it to their own. There were scores of Welsh triple harps made in the 18th and 19th century. Welsh harp makers were quick to innovate, and they were making triple harps in London from the 1730s. The tradition continued and was even taken up by the Welsh travelling families like the Woods and the Roberts. This characteristic high-headed Welsh harp is evident in the pictures of the Roberts family playing for Queen Victoria in 1889. It is able to do some things that other chromatic harps can't do, and a number of Denise's sets of variations include these variations. I'm going to play for you one of the sets from her book, a piece called The Welsh Ground. I won't play all 24 variations, but I will play the one that's typical.
In Crescent-Kerno there's a box. It's a deed box that once belonged to the wealthy Rashley family of Menabilly near Foy. On the outside it looks pretty boring, but when we open the box we find this. Let's look closer. The box is lined with printed sheets from a very rare psalter by John Cousin, published by John Wolfe in 1585. The music is on the base, the lid, the sides and the edges, and sometimes the bleed from the opposite side is visible. From this we can identify a significant amount of previously unknown material, both melodies and some internal parts. Here's another fragment. Let me explain what this book is for. Playing dance tunes or singing popular songs on a Sunday was frowned on in the late 16th century, but psalms were acceptable. So this is a collection designed to be enjoyed at home. It is religious music, but it's designed to be played in a domestic setting for recreation just as much as religious devotion. The Psalter originally comprised 6 books, one for each part. They were labelled Cantus, Altus, Tenor, Quintus, Sextus and Bassus. Some of the pieces were intended to be sung in 6-part harmony, and others were intended to be sung by one voice accompanied by a consort of 4 viols. There were 43 of the 6-part choral arrangements and 14 of the 5-part consort pieces. Some copies of some of the part books exist in various libraries around the world. However, a cantus book has never ever been found, which means that this music has not had a performance as originally written since the 16th century. However, the Rashley box has notation from 17 psalms in both cantus and altus parts, music that exists nowhere else. So the potential exists to reassemble some of the lost music of John Cousin after over 400 years of silence. This is a wonderful discovery. So here is Psalm 3, set for viol consort. This has been a very swift review of the music book of Philippa Davies, mostly compiled between 1747 and 1755, the harp book of Denise Nankivell, compiled between 1813 and about 1822, and the Rashley deed box fragments dated 1585. Thank you very much for listening.
If you'd like to find out more about the music of Philippa Davies or Denise Nankivell, both manuscripts have been transcribed with the kind permission of Cres and Kerno and are available as books from Mike O'Connor. We are still working on the Rashley deed box, and as yet we don't know where our research findings may be published.